welcome everybody spending this afternoon here with us for 2 hours talking about International Day of the Tropics. So a couple of housekeeping rules just behind me. Firstly, I think I want to download here the Slido platform. So all the questions you have, please put them up on Slido. At the end of the different presentations, we will go through different questions and answer them with a round table discussion. Everybody sitting here, and then I think it's much more interactive. A couple of things, photos and videos will be taken for publicity purposes, if you're okay with this. All attendants will be asked to use this Slido platform for questions, which we ask at the end. And right at the end of the presentation, there will be a satisfaction poll, online attendance, to see how the survey was, if they're happy with everything. Any problems with Zoom for our friends, and I think there are 50 plus or Zoom in the moment, please ask for technical issues using the chat button. So I'd like to open this day with a few words, something quick about mental health in the tropics. But firstly, it's a true privilege for me today to include this conference and open this in honor of the International Day of the Tropics, which is vital and often overlooked mental health challenges in the tropical regions. So the tropics are vibrant and diverse, of course, as we know, and home to nearly half the world's population already, some of the fastest growing economies worldwide. Yet behind the natural beauty and the cultural richness lies a growing mental health crisis, one that is often hidden, stigmatized, and underserved. From the psychological impacts of climate change, poverty, displacement, and infectious diseases, all the way to limited care, deep-rooted social stigmas, the mental health burden in the tropics is complex and urgent. Today, we gather not only to raise awareness, but to foster dialogue, share solutions, and champion equity in mental health care. This is a moment to recognize that mental health is not a luxury, but it's a right. This must be integrated into all aspects of health and development in the tropics. Thank you for being part of this important conversation today. Together, let us work together for the future where mental health is visible, valued, and supported for all. Thank you. So I come to the first speaker. We have several speakers. Our first speaker came all the way from Australia to give the opening. This is Professor Zoltan Sanye. Professor Zoltan is center head of the Margaret Roderick Center for Mental Health Research at JCU, very recently founded research center, and he will tell you more about this just now. Zoltan is a medical trained PhD neuroscientist, with an active research program in the neurobiological mechanisms of stress and psychiatric disorders, including drug addiction, schizophrenia, and depression. The postdoctoral training at Harvard Medical School, he held an independent research position at the Rockefeller University, supported by 2 prestigious fellowships. Zoltan was involved also in a startup company focusing on behavioral neurosciences, and then he developed their new animal models for psychiatric disorders. Prior to establishing the Psychiatric Neuroscience Laboratory at James Cook University in 2012, he was university lecturer at the pharmacology and fellow of the Pembroke College at the University of Cambridge. Professor Zoltan, the floor is over to you.
Thank you very much, Andreas, for the kind introduction, and thanks very much for inviting me and making it possible for me to come over from Australia and talk to you about some of the work what we are doing. For the first part of the talk, I'm going to talk about brain health, brain functions, and living in the tropics. Within the short time available, I'm not planning to give you answers, but I just would like to raise some questions for future discussions. So why does mental health, why does brain health matter to us here in the tropics? So we were asking these questions in the lab, and we set out to study that by some quantitative means. So we took advantage of the data collected within the Global Burden of Disease study, which is a large international study. They are publishing papers in JAMA regularly about the different conditions affecting people around the world. And we asked the question, how do the burdens caused by different brain health disorders changed over the last 30 years in the tropics and in some of the other non-tropical countries? When we talk about tropics and health, the first thing coming to your mind are the tropical infectious diseases. Tropical infectious diseases associated with the tropics. And so let's actually look at the numbers. How did those numbers change over the last 30 years? And what you can see there, that while the burden caused by tropical infectious disease in tropical countries decreased over the last 30 years, the burden caused by brain health disorders, which include mental, neurological, and substance use disorders, actually increased over 70% during the same period of time. And this is a really important information to absorb, because many of the countries in the tropics are relatively resource poor. Singapore is an exception among the tropical countries. And of course, those countries have to prioritize their health care. And mental health and brain health might not be among their priorities. But that is going to have a long-term significant impact on the whole population and economy of that society. So what you see there, same figure as I showed you before, and actually the different disorders in tropical countries, when we look at the infectious diseases, so we might be surprised why the infectious disease burden actually decreased over time. It decreased because we can treat some conditions such as TB and a neglected tropical disease is much better these days than 30 years ago. HIV is still there, mostly due to contribution of African countries. And this is the change of disease burden, mental health disease, brain health disease burden in tropical and the rest of the world. While the burden of brain disorders increased over the last 30 years worldwide, outside the tropics, the increase in tropical countries were almost twice as high. Again, highlighting the importance, the unique importance of the tropical nature of these countries. So if we think about the origin of mental health disorders, of course, we always talk about genetic susceptibility, underlying genetic and biological factors. And of course, beyond that, there are a lot of environmental factors that are in play. So biological environment, infectious factors, as Andreas mentioned. There are lots of interactions between infectious and brain disorders, not really have been talked about, but it's nevertheless important. We have the social environment, especially in dynamically changing societies, such as some of the tropical societies, where people are actually emerging from very significant poverty, improving their life. There's a big imbalance between income equity among people, providing source of chronic stress and therefore increasing the likelihood of some stress-related mental health disorders. But most importantly, and that's I would like to sort of underline that these effects are in fact real biological effects. So when we talk about the impact of the biological environment, the impact of the psychosocial environment, and the impact of an ecological environment, we're actually talking about biological changes occurring in the human body, which then will have an impact on the human brain. And that includes systemic inflammatory processes, that includes activation of immune molecules within the body, and also, more importantly, the activation of stress hormones. So many of these environmental factors are actually sensed by us, by our brain, as being stressful, moving us out from a homeostatic equilibrium. And that is what stress is for the human body. So we always have to consider that beyond or actually below those changes coming from the environment, there are underlying biological changes in the human body. What I would like to focus on for the rest of this part of the talk is the impact of climate change. Climate change, and especially certain aspects of it, are very palpable in Singapore, and it might be a good topic for future discussion. So there are acute climate-related health hazards, such as hurricanes, major floods, wildfires. These are all things that very often happen back in Australia. And there are slower onset threats that are there over a long period of time, including changes in the ecosystem altogether, food and water insecurity. So Andreas's research, what to do with food security and insecurity as well, how we can make sure that large segments of the population will have enough access to healthy and safe food, and loss of place and culture. And I'll show you examples to that later on. I'll give you some actual scientific, examples of such an impact does exist from climate change to mental health. So bushfires occur in Australia. The data I'm showing are actually coming from major bushfires from Southern California, another dry area, very often hit by major bushfires. Just the last one happened in Los Angeles not a long time ago, major devastating bushfires. So what they did in this study, they actually took the trouble and looked at changes in mental health complaint, anxiety disorders such as post-traumatic stress disorder, major depression, and generalized anxiety disorder. And what you see on the figure is that depending on whether you were immediately affected by the bushfire, or you were nearby or completely unaffected, that actually had a major impact how much of these mental health symptoms you develop. The more closer you were, the more associated you were with the immediate impact of bushfire, the higher the likelihood that you had longer lasting mental health issues. Hurricanes, cyclones are also becoming a lot more frequent with climate change. Not that they did not exist before, they just became probably less predictable and more frequent. What I'm giving example of is Hurricane Katrina, occurred quite some years ago in New Orleans, and the image what you see is exactly what happened. A large swath of land became inundated by water in the low-lying areas of New Orleans, major devastation. As it usually happens, mostly affecting people in the lower socioeconomic strata of the society. So again, research studies have been done, and this is one example showing results coming out of that. Increased post-traumatic stress disorder and the diagnosis of serious mental illness. And we are talking about major depression, bipolar disease, schizophrenia. And here we are not claiming that the climate change event caused the mental health disorder, but someone with underlying condition already initiated or facilitated the reemergence of previous symptoms. So certainly with underlying susceptibility, major traumatic life events, and we know that from the literature from other areas, major traumatic life events can precipitate the appearance of severe psychiatric disorders, and of course suicide increased in frequency. Much closer to home to us, that Cyclone Yasi that occurred just a year before I moved to North Queensland. Again, the effect was quite devastating in a small geographical area. And some of my colleagues at JCU, Townsville, they did something clever. They asked the question, what was the impact of Cyclone Yasi on the mental health of individuals that got affected? You can run questionnaires and things like that. You can ask people, but what they did, they actually looked at prescriptions for anxiety and depression. And those are actual numbers, can be retrieved from GP records. And what they saw, that there was a very significant increase in antidepressant prescription in the area hit by Cyclone Yasi during the period of time and after Cyclone Yasi, compared the same month of the year a year before. So it was actually quite a clever study to do. And what they also did, they also looked at other drugs. So they went to see a doctor more often and they got more antidepressants. No, because the same relationship did not exist for lipid and glucose lowering drugs. So it was specific to their depression symptoms. Again, seemed to be linked to the devastating cyclone. Sea level rise, loss of habitat. That's really something which we have to consider. And people living in some other parts of the world may not appreciate that happening, especially in some of the Pacific Island communities. And pretty much anyone who lives nearby the sea, just like you do and we do back in Australia. And these are just some quotes from a lovely study done some years ago by, again, JCU investigators in the low-lying bits and pieces of the Solomon Islands. So these people are actually very worried about their disappearing space. And think about it. That's the space they have been living for hundreds of years, generation after generation. They had their burial sites that are just disappearing because the sea level has been rising and areas disappear completely. And therefore their ancestors are gone. The bones of their ancestors are gone. It's actually generating quite significant anxiety. We were trying to follow that up and just recently published this systematic review by my great PhD student, Tina, looking into the mental health impact of climate change in Pacific Island countries, especially as it relates to sea level rise and other extreme weather events. And the reason for this paper was that although Pacific Island nations are disproportionately affected by sea level rise, there is not much out there. They have really been understudied and neglected. And that's the point we wanted to raise with this paper. So if we look at the impact of climate change on mental health, I think the take-home message is that the underlying mechanisms are very much similar to the effect of traumatic stress of different kind. So traumatic things, bad things happening to people early in life, later in life, we know very well have profound impact on brain function, brain structure, neurochemistry, actual measurable biological changes, and contribute the increased likelihood of mental health disorders. And the same seems to be true for the impact of climate change and the effect of climate change on mental health as well. And I'm not going to get into the biological details, but if there is question about that, happy to answer that in details. One thing I thought I should bring up is the effect of high ambient temperature, heat waves. It's enough just to leave this lovely air-conditioned room that you realize that this is an issue. I've been living in tropical North Queensland for 13 years. So I also do appreciate what comes with increased heat. And these are, again, it's not just we don't feel very good and feel tired and all that. These are, again, actual biological changes that take place in the brain, affecting the way we can assess environment, the way we can think, and the way we can behaviorally properly respond to the environment. So we need to keep in mind that these are, again, real biological changes initiated by a major environmental factor, in this case, heat waves increasing ambient temperature. So after this sort of more scientific bit, I'd like to take the next probably 5 minutes, if Andreas allows me, to introduce the Margaret Roderick Center for Mental Health Research, which I'm having. So, at a very rare stroke of luck, if I may so, James Cook University was on the receiving end of a significant private donation through the bequest of the late Margaret Roderick, $34 million, which is a good amount, to set up a mental health research center with a specific focus on mental health issues related to the community and deliver solutions with impact on the community. So if you like, you can call this applied mental health research, applied neuroscience, or applied brain research. In a sense, our center is different from some of the main neuroscience research institutes like Florey in Cambridge, Queensland Brain Institute, Florey in Melbourne, or the Queensland Brain Institute, where they try to discover a new pathway to treat a particular disease. Usually nothing comes out of that sort of research because it's a lot more complicated than that. But what we would like to do, we would like to focus on issues that are particularly relevant to the community. And when I say community, it's a very broadly interpreted community. It's North Queensland, Northern Australia, our Pacific neighborhood, and the tropics worldwide. It's a very broad remit, but I think it's really good to have such a broad remit because that allows us, and me as center head in particular, to be very inclusive. And I'll get to that point in a second. And this is sort of the vision statement of the center, which I don't want to read out loud. I just would like to emphasize some of the highlighted parts of that statement. We really would like to create a thriving research environment that facilitates communication between academics and researchers across the whole of the JCU ecosystem. It's not Townsville, it's not JCU Australia, it's the whole of the JCU ecosystem, really. And to deliver solutions that have relevance to the community. It's great to have papers published in Science and Nature, but who cares, really? Other than your research administrators who are happy for a week or so. But you really want to make an impact, something meaningful. And that's what we are trying to achieve with this center. And we really take the multidisciplinary nature to the heart. So far, we have about 130 members of it's a virtual center, it's not a building. We are not spending the $34 million on a building. We are spending that $34 million over a number of years to facilitate research and give the money to researchers to do cutting edge stuff. Of course, for our remit in Australia, regional, rural, and remote are very important, hugely underserved aspect of mental health care in Australia, which we would like to make a a big difference at. And the way we look at mental health disorders is quite comprehensive. So we would be able to, we would like to be able to look into early recognition, being diagnosis or other ways of recognizing an increased risk for mental health conditions through prevention, ideally, which is rare in the area of mental health, psychiatry, and psychology. We know from other areas of medicine that prevention is the most effective way of dealing with health issues and probably the most economic way of doing it. And it's been almost completely lacking in the area of psychiatry and mental health disorders. And we would like to help changing that as well. And developing new treatment entities. There are already attempts within the center's community to move to that direction. Also, we are taking a very broad look in terms of the lifespan of human beings. We believe if we would like to make a difference in the mental health of a particular community, we would have to go back very early on. Mental health and brain health start not even with conception, it probably starts before that. So there are really important lifestyle factors that are in play that very, very strongly determine the way the brain develops during the very early fetal stage. And of course, childhood, highly dynamically developing brain, new connections developing and disappearing. The brain is being sculpted to the adult human brain during that period of time. Intervening, realizing, recognizing a non-optimal developmental pattern is very important, and also figuring out ways how we can make sure that the most optimal trajectory takes place. And that's important because some parts of the brain, like the prefrontal cortex, develops well into the 20s, probably late 20s for boys, actually much later. And if we look at increasing lifespan, so we have an aging population in Australia as well as in Singapore, and that by definition brings age-related mental health, brain health-related problems such as cognitive decline. Under the best of circumstances, our physical abilities decline, so our mental abilities and cognitive abilities. What can we do about that? According to the most recent research, about 40% of the factors that contribute in age-related cognitive decline are preventable. So let's try to get that out and see what happens within a community. And that includes many things that can be changed and can be improved, like social connectedness, having a hearing aid. That's really interesting. Hearing impairment is one of the major causes of early dementia, not Alzheimer's, it's age-related dementia. Being cognitively involved, of course, being socially involved, really important. Looking after metabolic health, avoiding excess weight gain, obesity, developing metabolic syndrome, having high circulating blood glucose over a long period of time is not a good thing. We know that, and it's fully preventable. And if we put all this together, we have a much better chance of making sure that we can maintain a good cognitive health well into our 80s or even into our 90s. So the center is formalized around 3 major themes. The themes are really broad. So in brief, I could say anything that has anything to do with mental health fits in. And it's probably true. The first major theme deals with major psychiatric disorders. That's schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, major depression. So the traditional domain of psychiatry. The second major theme deals with sort of neurodevelopmental issues, neurodivergent phenotypes, healthy brain development, healthy cognitive aging, these sort of things. And also some particularly vulnerable populations, such as youth, first responders, paramedics, police, firemen, subjected to awful, highly traumatic events through their career, not being looked after at all. They develop PTSDs left and right. They can't stick to the job. It's really terrible. And some other vulnerable population like First Nations people in Australia, especially First Nation youth. And the third theme deals with development of new treatment entities, cutting-edge developments in mental health research and practice, the application of AI, machine learning into recognition, prevention, and treatment of mental health disorders. And what you can see on the what is your right-hand side is the distribution of center members in terms of their expertise in different areas. It's actually quite well covered, the three major themes almost equally by our memberships. And down below, you see the distribution of the center members based on their affiliation. So across the whole JCU ecosystem, all 5 colleges, including business and law, education and social work and medicine and all that. And the reason I'm saying that, because I would like to invite academics from the JCU Singapore campus as well to, we have 8 of you already being part of the center, which I'm very happy about, but I'm sure there would be more people whose research interest and research activity broadly falls into this widely defined mental health. By all means, do reach out, and we would love to have you as members of the center. So the center is a virtual center, as I said, driven by the questions we are going to look at, is driven by issues that are affecting the community. And we are working with a number of other entities as partners, and that includes locally the Tansy University Hospital, something that is called the Tropical Australian Academic Health Centre. That's an umbrella organization of the different healthcare entities in the North Queensland area. And very importantly, community groups and other institutions. So since the creation of the center, that was sort of early March, I've been in touch with some leading research institutions within Australia, like Origin, which is the Youth Mental Health Institute in Melbourne, Queensland Brain Institute. We have already done projects together with them, the Queensland Institute for Medical Research, and other internationally very highly regarded institution. So we are talking to them about how we can collaborate and bring this research forward. Last point, what are we going to spend the money on? The money is going to be spent on supporting research in the forms of different grants and scholarship schemes. And you see some examples to that. Later this week, we are going to advertise the first round of the seed grant scheme, small amount of money, sufficient to get some honest projects started, give some money to get projects off the ground, which will be followed by large grants up to 250,000. That's sort of proper money to get research done and to obtain research results and publications for applying for outside grants. A number of different scholarship schemes, including PhD scholarship, visiting professor scheme, as well as an industry fellowship, which will be open to people who are not from the academia, who are from hospitals, other healthcare organizations wanting to do research with JCU academics. And that includes JCU Singapore, of course, as well, and they should be eligible to apply for It's funny. So thanks very much. And I would love to welcome as many of you are interested in the center. Thank you.
Sultan, that was fantastic introduction and an overview about mental health in the tropics. While they are changing the presentation, just my own kind of thoughts. Cyclone Yasi, 2011, I was actually just moving into Townsville in North Queensland, so we had the first massive cyclone, and the impact psychologically, what Sultan mentioned, is really something we felt. Right now, this picture you saw, flooded houses, is right now happening even now in March, April in Australia. So talking now about the next speaker, I would like to introduce Associate Professor Denise Dillon. She is in a moment the Acting Dean of Research at James Cook University in Singapore, and she's Associate Dean of Research Education. Denise is the current Acting Dean, which I mentioned just now, and she is also Chair of the JSU Singapore Institutional Animal Care and Use Committee. The primary research focus is biophilia, something Sultan earlier mentioned, is pertaining to both natural and built environments. And this includes factors such as nature connectedness and eco-anxiety. Denise is a certified sports therapy guide, and her research portfolio intersects diverse fields from environmental health to education, psychology, ultimately benefiting community well-being, mental health support, and advocacy for inclusive, nature-friendly spaces and practices. Denise, please hand over to you.
Thank you. And I'm very pleased to be one of Dalton's new members. So let's see how it goes. So this is how broad it is. I feel like I'm the light entertainment in between all of the serious research, but let's see. I also like to think that I live my research. So my primary focus is on biophilia. Sorry. Yep. So when people think about forests, we often think of the very aesthetic elements of them. So what do they look like? But forests are very immersive environments. They're more than just what they look like. And we might feel happy or sad in them, or we might even feel uneasy. So all these photos are from a trip I took into Indonesia in Kerinci area, which is one of the very few areas where there's proper forest left. I went on a tiger expedition, didn't see any tigers, but the notion is that tigers could be there. So when you're in the forest, it's not just about the trees and what you see, but it's all of the things that you might experience within that environment. And so forests can make us feel happy and inspired, but they might also make us feel a little bit uneasy. And my notion here is in urban environments, we're getting more and more distanced away from these natural environments, and we're creating environments that are in some way almost quasi-similar to forests, but they're not. And so I'm trying to understand, as we progress more and more into these urban environments, how do people feel about them in the way that makes them feel comfortable and not uneasy? So Edward O. Wilson wasn't the originator of the idea of biophilia, but he popularized the notion that he says, if it exists, and he believed it exists, is the innately emotional affiliation of human beings to other living organisms. So that can be other people. So we want to be socially connected to others, but we also are attracted to just things that are alive, like us. And he says the feelings molded by the learning rules fall along several emotional spectra. And I'm going to come back to that at the end of my presentation, because it's interesting. We mostly think of biophilia as this affiliation for things, but there's the flip side of that in biophobia. The key themes we're looking at here, though, are the benefits that can be gained by living near, creating in, and feeling psychologically connected to nature, or whatever nature means in that sense. And they're all associated with overall mental health. So that's a positive notion. So the psychological connection to nature, we'll explore a little bit, then living near and recreating in, and what are the benefits, and what are those impacts on mental health. So psychological connectedness to nature develops over time, and people who've studied it across the lifespan find that even very young children can have high connectedness to nature. And there's a, I'll put the slide this way. So if they're high when they're young, there's a dip in the teenage years, and that seems to be the time when people are finding their sense of identity with other people. So they're not so much connected to nature environments, but more so to people. They become more social, and then nature connectedness increases again in early adulthood. Whether it's for men the same, I'm not sure, but they have done it across both genders. So this individual subjective sense of their relationship with the natural world is what I'm talking about when I talk about nature connectedness. It's that relationship with the shared place in nature, and it develops over time and with repeated experience in natural places. Benefits can be gained, involve a greater sense of purpose. So we're talking then about meaning in life even can be developed by having a connection to nature. And we get feelings of awe and the sense of interconnectedness, which can actually increase people's pro-environmental behaviour. If we feel like we're part of the whole biota, then we're probably more likely to want to protect that and save it. And so we act more positively. As for living near forests, a study recently showed that proximity to nature is really important. So in this figure, sorry if I look this way, we're looking at the proportion of people who are close to forest cover and then the proportion of forest cover. So if we can see, once it gets to beyond 20 to 25% forest cover, there are benefits in terms of mental health. People feel less anxious and less depressed. And as it gets even higher, there's an even greater benefit for people. Sorry, I'm a little bit far away from the screen. 50% less anxiety once it gets more than 30% forest cover. So for fortunate people who live in forested areas, in urban environments, there are definite benefits in terms of their mental health. There's also benefits of reduced stress levels. And of course, part of that comes from, but also there's benefits of reduced noise pollution, improved air quality, and opportunities for physical activity that are not so available in less forested areas. People also like to recreate in forests, as I do, and it's shown in my slides here. So many people enjoy activities such as bird watching or picnicking in forests. You might complain about, well, there's ants and there's insects, but still people do tend to like those sorts of experiences, even if it's a once a year thing, and you reminisce about them. So the psychological benefits there can be a short-term boost in mood, short-term boosts of creativity, decreases in anxiety and depression. An important part of this, if we go back to the connection to nature, it can't be just a one-off thing. So it does need to be repeated, but we can get these short-term bursts of nature connectedness even when we come back to our regular environments. Stop and listen to a bird singing. Stop and smell a flower, smell the roses occasionally, feel the grass under your feet periodically. All of those things can actually lead to these benefits over time. And there is a science behind it. It used to be one of those airy-fairy kind of notions that, oh, you're just studying, forest bathing, it's not a real thing. It's been shown time and time again now. There's a whole batch of research on this to demonstrate that, yes, there are definitely measurable benefits. A team in the UK showed that even spending 2 hours a week in nature can improve well-being. They bring it down to that brief a time because it's also been demonstrated that in the UK, there was a study by the Nature Trust, and they showed that very few children even will spend 12 seconds listening, and they've developed a whole, getting close to nature connection over time, over 9 weeks, I think, and it starts with short bursts of nature connectedness. So 20 seconds asking people, just stop and listen to a bird on your way to school, because the children aren't doing that anymore. They're not reporting those experiences. Feelings of nature connectedness and mood were shown to improve following a nature immersion. So that's one of the studies we did here in Singapore. We can compare a guided group versus a non-guided group. And whether they were guided or not didn't matter. It was the nature immersion experience that really mattered. Frequency of visits to nature was positively associated with nature connectedness. And that's what I'm saying. It can't be just a one-off thing. It does need to build up over time. And as you're more and more in nature, you become more comfortable in those places and get to observe more of the connection, more of the interconnectedness, I guess. A higher frequency of experience in specific environments is associated with enhanced feelings of eudaimonia in those environments. And I'm going to go through one of the studies that we did shortly. So, as I said, there is a flip side about this. When I talk about feelings about forests, it's all happy and wonderful and there's benefits, but some people are terrified. There's biophobia, and that's a natural reaction as well. It can be learned though. So forests can evoke fear if people have parents who talk about forests in those negative ways and fearful ways and don't let them explore. There can also be feelings of unease or melancholiness in some individuals, just the disconnect from other people, particularly if you go on your own. It can instill feelings of sadness. Reasons might include cultural narratives. So what is the expectations in the culture that you come from personal experiences, as I say, with parents that you've learned over time, or just that lack of familiarity. If you don't have experiences and you don't have opportunities for those experiences, you don't get the learned, connectedness over time. Some young adults have reported feelings of anxiety and uncertainty in woodlands. So that's not even forests. Woodlands, I guess, are another layer of, less chaotic than forests, but still feeling anxious and uncertain can be an experience for some people. So the counterpoint to this is research has indicated that some natural green spaces, such as wilderness, can evoke negative reactions. So that can be due to the associations of the mortality risk. So remember I said I was walking in a place where there is a genuine opportunity or a chance to encounter tigers or things that can hurt you. And so that's a mortality association and it is a risk. How much you assess that risk can vary. And of course, some people might consider it a very high risk. The chances of actually encountering a tiger are very low. And so I considered it a lower risk, but I can understand that some people could have found that terrifying. Ambivalent responses are also possible. So the sense of awe in itself is an ambivalent feeling. It's almost feeling fearful while in having some great respect for something as well. So scared but exhilarated is another example of that. So what we wanted to study is in an urban environment like Singapore, there are many different types of environments here, and we wanted to see what are the different effective responses that people would have to different types of environments, whether they're natural or built. And so we had a number of different environments that we had photos of. We just showed people photos to see whether they would have positive or negative responses. So eudaimonic is a positive response, apprehension, a negative response. And we wanted to see what the differences were. So we controlled for people's level of nature connectedness, because naturally, if you feel connected to nature, you might have a very positive response in any environment. And trait anxiety, because also if by nature you're an anxious person, you might also feel anxious in any of those environments. So I'm not going to go through this in great depth, but we did have a methodology. We used a survey method whereby we showed participants photographs of these environments, and we had, I think, 5 examples of the environments, and we had 2 photos to represent each of those, both for natural and for built. And then we asked them a series of questions about, if you were in this environment, what would you feel in that place? We also had measures of their past childhood experiences in nature and current experiences in nature, their nature connectedness, and of course their trait anxiety and some demographics. So these are the types of spaces we examined, and this is really just representative for Singapore because these are the typical types of environments that I come across in all of my wanderings here. So we've got beach, forest, river, wetland, and woodland in the natural environments. And in the built ones, we've got grassy field, heritage city street, modern city street, rooftop garden, and town park. Now you can see that there is an array of variety amongst all of those, so they're diverse. What we wanted though for the built environments was that continuum. So you can see some natural aspects, but you can also see built aspects in those, whereas in the natural ones, we wanted to make sure that they didn't have so much of the built aspect in them. It isn't as though any of them are entirely natural. We understand that. So the survey was hosted online in Qualtrics, and you can see this is the way it would have looked if you were a participant. So you saw the image, and then we asked the questions. So we had a number of mood states. So if you saw this, if you were in this place, how would you feel if we said alive? So not at all the way to intensely. So key findings, eudaimonic and apprehensive responses. No significant difference in feelings of eudaimonia between natural and built green spaces. So people could feel good in any of those spaces, but there were higher levels of apprehension in the nature type spaces, more so than the built ones. If we looked at the frequency of experience, the frequent visits to specific types of environments, so if I'd been to woodlands a lot, I would associate those with more enhanced feelings of eudaimonia in those environments. So I'd feel better in those specific environments. The frequency of visits to both natural and built environments influences the development of both apprehensive and eudaimotic feelings. That's what I'm saying. If we want nature connectedness or any type of learned response to an environment, we have to keep going back to it. And I guess if you're going to build apprehensive feelings over time, maybe you could aim to change your experiences over time so you could become less apprehensive. In terms of the childhood location, because remember we asked about people's experiences in nature in the past and in the present. So childhood location did affect levels of apprehension and eudaimonia. So we compared urban versus suburban places growing up and versus rural. And there were some significant differences. I'm not going into the details of that because I'm getting into a larger portion here. Nature connectedness. So current levels of nature connectedness are crucial. How much you're connected to nature now can override the impact of whether or not you had childhood experiences in nature. So if you had no childhood experiences with nature, it doesn't matter, provided you build up that nature connectedness over time. So it definitely can be learned. Now, this is what we did. We wanted to look at the overlay between people's experiences and reported feelings of apprehension and their feelings of, apprehension this way and eudaimonia this way. So we've plotted it out, and I know this one's a little bit hard to read, so I'm going to make it in a prettier format for you. So here we go. This is still apprehension along here. Eudaimonia along here, apprehension this way. So at the higher quadrants, it's people felt more apprehensive. And particularly when we're talking about apprehensive here, they felt anxious, isolated, or lonely in those places. When we're talking about eudaimonia, it's freedom, refreshed, relaxed, sense of fun, serene, talkative. So positive experiences. And so at that end, it's higher feelings of eudaimonia. So we can see then in the top quadrant, we've got high eudaimonia and high apprehension. So that's forests and, oddly enough, town parks. Explain that one. In the bottom quadrant, we've got high eudaimonia, but low apprehension. So mostly positive feelings, heritage city streets, which I kind of expected. A lot of people in Singapore just like the built environments here, and rivers and woodland kind of features in that quadrant as well. And then we've got low eudaimonia, but high apprehension So wetlands and rooftop gardens, explain that one as well. So there we go. That's what we found for those. And our recommendations kind of are geared towards urban planners. So we wanted to see, because, you know, Urban Redevelopment Authority is always trying to interface with green groups and ask what are the things that people would enjoy. So we can kind of focus on some of the recommendations here to consider the findings to enhance the restorative potential of urban green spaces. So potentially focusing more on built green spaces like rooftop gardens and town parks to somehow alleviate apprehensive feelings, maybe make them better. And the study underscores the importance of integrating the green spaces into urban design. So it did show that, you know, people can feel good in many different types of places. So if we bring it together, one of the key takeaways for me is that green spaces provide these profound psychological benefits, but they can evoke varied emotions that we have to take into account depending on individual differences in people, but also on the spaces themselves. So we studied these 10 different types of environments. And I'm coming back to Edward Wilson here. So his full quote ends, you know, the learning rules fall from across several emotional spectra. And he did say, from attraction to aversion, from awe to indifference, from peacefulness to fear-driven anxiety. So had I known it, Edward Wilson told me the answer to that study before I conducted the study. But that's part of research, isn't it? We have to go and explore to make sure that we can test our hypotheses. So that's mine. I do acknowledge people who've participated and co-collaborated with me in those studies. The Association of Nature and Forest Therapy kind of inspired me to do that through my training. And I'm acknowledging World Sumatra for taking me on my wonderful trip and letting me have those beautiful photos. So thank you.
Denise, that was really interesting. It was not a place filler at all. I grew up in nature, so I think that's really very much very important, I think, where you grew up and how you feel afterwards. So I would like to introduce the next speaker, Dr. Li Yanhui. So she's a psychiatry resident at the National Healthcare Group and also as the Institute of Mental Health here in Singapore. Dr. Li earned her BSc in Biomedical Science from the National University of Singapore under a STAR Graduate Research Scholarship and completed her MD at the Duke NUS Graduate Medical School. Alongside clinical training, Dr. Li has remained active in research and aspires to a career in academic psychiatry. Her dedication to the field has been recognized with this prestigious award, including the Early Career Academic Excellence Award from the Schizophrenia International Research Society. And an early career research grant through the National Healthcare Group Clinician Scientist Repertory Program. Dr. Li's research focus is on schizophrenia, the particular interest in treatment, resistance, biomarkers, and intervention, aiming to improve patient outcome. She has previously authored publications examining the impact of varied symptomatology on quality of life and functioning in schizophrenia, and currently is investigating neurological changes associated with treatment resistance. So something which is much more measurable as what we heard just now, but as important. Thanks, Dr. Li.
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. So we've heard quite a bit on the impact of climate change as well as nature on mental health so far. And we are going to zoom in now to look at what's happening within the human body. I will be talking about links between the immune system and schizophrenia. And right now, we actually don't really know the actual cause of schizophrenia. We think that it is mostly caused by a chemical imbalance in the brain, but it doesn't really explain everything. So there are some studies showing that the immune system's abnormalities may contribute to some of the underlying pathophysiology or be associated with schizophrenia. So this may sound like a very controversial idea, but there has been a lot of research about this recently, and it's quite a hot topic. And for those of you who may have heard about this, there is a lot of history about this, which I will talk about later on. And for those of you who may not have heard so much about it, there are quite a number of local studies looking at it. So I will also talk about what we are doing locally to investigate this. So has anybody come across this, brain on fire? I think it's quite well known, but you may not have come across it. So this is a story of one of the New York Post reporter, Susanna Cahalan. She wrote a book called Brain on Fire, and it was also made into a Netflix film. And this is basically a story of how she became very acutely unwell psychiatrically. So she was just walking into her office one day, and suddenly she just started laughing hysterically for no reason. And then she felt a sense of sadness overwhelm her and started crying. And she couldn't figure out what was happening to her. She later on also started to develop delusions and hallucinations. So she thought that her father was a murderer, and she felt that people were secretly recording her, and also felt that she could age people just with the power of her mind. Then she started developing seizures, multiple seizures, had to be hospitalized for a long time. She was a medical mystery. The doctors couldn't figure out what was happening to her, until one day they sent some of her spinal fluid to one of the lab tests. They didn't just send it to any lab, but they sent it to a neurologist who was doing a lot of research on rare antibodies within the brain and the blood, because the original antibody panel came back negative in the hospital. So that's when they figured out what was wrong with her. What she was having was called anti-NMDA receptor encephalitis. So this is a kind of autoimmune inflammation of the brain, where the brain produces proteins or antibodies which attacks the NMDA receptors in the brain tissue. So it's attacking itself in the brain. And not too long ago, this was first formally described by Dr. Joseph Dalmau from the University of Pennsylvania. And yes, he was the one who actually looked at Susanna's cerebral spinal fluid samples and found those rare antibodies, because Susanna actually fell sick in 2009, and he first described this in 2007 in this seminal paper of his. So now we know that this particular form of autoimmune encephalitis happens frequently mostly in females, and somehow those with ovarian teratomas or growths in the ovaries. And we now know that besides this, there are approximately 18 different types of autoimmune encephalitis caused by different antibodies, which are proteins that attack different kinds of substances in the tissues. So as a psychiatrist, the question then is, does this kind of autoimmune or immune system involvement also possibly contribute to psychiatric symptoms in seemingly pure psychiatric illnesses like schizophrenia? Can that be a possibility? Maybe the levels are too low in the blood such that we are unable to detect them, or do we still not know something about those? Because in these cases, they do have very florid psychiatric symptoms, although the difference is that they also have physical symptoms, mostly neurologic symptoms like seizures or certain weaknesses in parts of their body. So this is an idea that has been picked up a lot in recent years, and it's quite a hot topic in psychiatric research. So you can see the Scientist magazine, even YouTube asking, is schizophrenia an autoimmune condition? So clickbait aside, there may be some element of truth to this, which we are keen to investigate. And on the academic front, there is also increasing interest among researchers looking at the link between psychosis or schizophrenia and immune system dysregulation. So this is a graph showing the different number of publications over the years. And you can see it's been increasingly going up with two spikes, one around 2009, just after the seminal paper on anti-NMDA receptor encephalitis, and another one in 2021. So maybe because of COVID. It was around that period, and we do know there were a lot of neuropsychiatric manifestations reported as well with COVID-19 infection. So although this is quite a hot topic currently, it's not an entirely new idea. And there have been a lot of observations dating back to the 19th century suggesting possible immune involvement in schizophrenia. From epidemiological studies looking at increased risk of schizophrenia with maternal and fetal infections, to more recently genetic molecular studies as well as neuroimaging looking at parts of the brain that lights up. All of these do suggest that there could be some immune dysregulation in schizophrenia patients, and it seems to correlate with the severity of their psychotic symptoms. So just a crash course on the immune system before I talk about what we've been doing in Singapore at the Institute of Mental Health to better understand some of the results that I will talk about later. The immune system is split into two components, the innate component as well as the adaptive component. The innate component is something that we're all born with. So we have cells as well as molecules which can attack the foreign invaders or bugs that you come into contact with. And then the adaptive component of the immune system has other cells and molecular components which recognizes these foreign pathogens or bugs and helps the immune system become stronger to mount a stronger response in future if you meet the same bug so that you can better fight it off. So in our studies, we are looking at major cell types, including the T cells, B cells, as well as dendritic cells and cells known as the natural killer or NK cells. And we're looking mainly at the cellular component of immunity here. We're not looking at any molecular components. It's important to note that in the T cells, there are two main subsets. So there's the CD4 positive T cells, which are known as helper cells because they help other components of the immune system initiate downstream pathways or cascades to promote inflammation. And there is also the CD8 positive T cells, and this certain subset of T cells has what we call cytotoxic properties. So these cells are able to release substances to kill whatever cells that have been infected with the foreign pathogens or bugs. So we are working in tandem with researchers at A*STAR at the Singapore Immunology Network. And we have been, in fact, we have completed comprehensive immune profiling of schizophrenia patients as well as healthy people to compare them. And our main aim was to identify significant immune cell populations that are associated with the schizophrenia condition and also the phenomenon of treatment resistance. So you may or may not know, but a significant proportion of schizophrenia patients do not respond well to the medications that we use to treat, called antipsychotics. Up to 30% of them respond poorly. And among those patients, we have a stronger medication called clozapine, which we use to treat so-called treatment-resistant patients. But even among this proportion of patients, a sizable number of them do not respond to this stronger medication. So this is a real problem clinically, which we are still trying our best to understand and solve. So we looked at up to 66 different immune cell populations to try to find significant ones which seems to be associated with schizophrenia and this phenomenon of treatment resistance, because then they may have some role to play in the underlying pathophysiology, or we could use them as biomarkers. And that is our hope. So how did we do this? We recruited 196 participants across 4 groups. So we have 49 healthy people from the community, and we recruited the rest of the patients in our hospital from inpatient wards as well as outpatient clinics. So we have the antipsychotic responsive patients, meaning they were responsive to the usual medicines that we give for schizophrenia. And then there's another group which is treatment resistant. So they didn't respond to at least 2 different kinds of the usual antipsychotic medications we give. So we gave them clozapine, which is a stronger medication. 70 of them are responsive to this clozapine, but 28 of these patients were not. So the 28 would be considered the most treatment resistant if you compare them with the other 2 groups. And we collected whole blood from all of these 4 groups, processed them to obtain the immune cells, ran them through a machine called a flow cytometer to export and count the number of cells in each of these samples. So we know the types of immune cells as well as the numbers for every single patient. And then we compared these numbers across the 4 groups, as well as between the healthy people and the 3 groups in total, which are the patients with schizophrenia. So this is just a schematic showing you the process of flow cytometry. Basically, we run the samples through a single tube in single file so that individual cells can be captured by the computer. We do this by shining a laser light on the cells, and the way the light scatters and the wavelengths that are recorded can tell us what kind of cell is running through and allows us to count the number of cells. So we export these data and then we do the comparison. So we had quite a lot of findings, but I'll just show you the main 2 or 3. And here you can see that two kinds of T cells came up as one of the most significant findings. So the first one is known as MAID cells. So this is not a very well-known cell type, but it stands for mucosa-associated invariant T cells. So like the name suggests, these cells are found in the mucosal lining and mainly in the intestinal mucosal lining. So it's in the gut. And the other thing that came up positive was this ratio actually of the 2 subtypes of T cells that I mentioned earlier. So CD4 positive over the CD8 positive T cells. So basically just a ratio of the balance of these 2 subtypes of T cells. And you can see that the MAID cells are much lower in schizophrenia as compared to healthy controls, while the ratio of CD4 over CD8 T cells are higher in schizophrenia as compared to the healthy people. And if you've looked at enough statistical graphs, you know that the larger the number of asterisks, the more statistically significant the differences are. So here we have like 3 asterisks. So it's quite, it's one of our top hits in what we found. So what about when we look at different levels of treatment resistance? So here the pink ones represent the healthy people. The green ones are the ones that are responsive to the usual medications. The blue ones are the ones that are responsive only to the stronger medication, clozapine, and the purple ones are the most treatment-resistant ones, which were resistant even to clozapine. And across the graph, with increasing treatment resistance, you can see that the MAID cells have a go on a downward trend, so they are reducing, and the CD4-CD8 T cell ratio is increasing with increasing treatment resistance. So the trends are similar to what we saw in the previous graphs. So what do these all mean? And although there's a lot of talk about immune system involvement in schizophrenia, how does it actually work? We don't actually know yet, but there are a few proposed mechanisms at present in the literature. So one of them is the idea that the T cell and certain cells called macrophages, which are like the vacuum cleaners of the cell, they go around sucking up debris or rubbish which the body doesn't want. So the idea is that these cells can produce a lot of substances called cytokines. If they keep doing this chronically over a long period of time, this can lead to sustained inflammation. And somehow that downstream can lead to certain neuronal processes that contributes to these symptoms that we see. That's the idea. And the other idea is a shift in the balance of certain T cells. So here you have the T helper 1 and T helper 2 subsets. And in schizophrenia, it's thought that the balance shifts more towards the Th2 subset. So it's a lot about all these shifting of different cell types, but exactly what they do, we don't know yet. Then there's the microglia hypothesis. So microglia are like the macrophages in the brain. And so basically they are the vacuum cleaner cells that go around sucking up debris. And the idea is that there is some issue with their normal function such that they cause neuronal damage. And that can lead to symptoms downstream. And then of course we have the autoimmune hypothesis, which is similar to what Susanna was having, where there's some kind of antibodies that the body produces which attacks the patient's own brain, just that we are not able to detect these antibodies yet, or there's some other mechanism at play which we do not fully understand. So in terms of the CD4 over CD8 T cell ratio, we are thinking that it could be related to the first scenario where the CD4 T cells may be releasing a lot of cytokines or substances, which leads to downstream inflammation. And some of our future work will be looking into some of these functional studies. And because the CD4 over CD8 ratio is increased in schizophrenia and increasing with increasing treatment resistance, we think that it could be a possible state marker for the schizophrenia condition, and we will be interested to look into it as a potential biomarker moving forward. MAIT cells, on the other hand, are less well described in literature. So if you remember, I mentioned they are mostly found in the gut lining, and some of you may have heard about the gut-brain axis, where the intestinal system communicates with the brain through different pathways, sometimes via a nerve that runs from the brain to the gut, but also via other chemicals like hormones or cytokines. So these cells are found mainly in the gut lining, and yet in the bloodstream, with increased severity of autoimmune diseases like multiple sclerosis, the MAIT cell levels in the blood are found to be lower. It is thought that that's because the MAIT cells migrate from the blood to the brain, so they enter the central nervous system, and maybe that is why the levels of MAIT cells in the blood are lower when we measure it, but in the brain, it might be higher. So far, there isn't too much research into that, so we are not entirely sure as well. But that would be an interesting thing to look into, whether or not there could be a similar mode of action in schizophrenia, since we do find MAIT cells to be very much downregulated in our study in schizophrenia and with increasing treatment resistance. So on the whole, we found two major potential biomarkers for schizophrenia as well as treatment resistance, and we are planning future studies to look into this. So these are the CD4 over CD8 T cell ratio and also the MAIT cells. And looking into the potential role of MAIT cells on the gut-brain axis will be something that is very interesting to look at as well. And this is our team members. And you can just contact me at this email if you have any questions or any ideas to bounce off if you find any of this interesting or relevant to your work. Thank you.
Appreciate this, a very nice presentation, very complex topic, really to present it quite digestible. And we saw early on nature feeling from Denise. Now we heard about gut feeling, basically, what happens in the gut. And I'd like to introduce the next speaker, Dr. Perline. She's a graduate with a doctorate in clinical psychology from the King's College in London, Institute of Psychiatry, Psychology and Neuroscience, and as a scholar under the NCSS Social Services Scholarship. Her clinical interest focuses on mood, anxiety, and trauma-related disorders. She completed her specialist training in a highly specialized outpatient service in the United Kingdom for anxiety disorders and post-traumatic stress disorders, which has honed her expertise in this area needed here also in Singapore. As a practicing principal clinical psychologist, she works closely with children, youth, and adults with mental health difficulties. In addition to her clinical work, Dr. Perline is committed to mentoring and supervising other psychologists. She is also a trainer and speaker on mental health issues, and they developed many training workshops for the community and organizations. But she is also a deputy program director at the National University of Singapore, where she oversees the training of mental health professionals here in Singapore. She is passionate about promotion of good mental health practices through upstream prevention work in a community, and she will talk about this just now. Thanks, Bill.
Thank you, everyone, for having me here and for giving the Singapore Psychological Society a platform to share about the work that we are doing in Singapore in the tropics. So today I'm actually representing the Singapore Psychological Society to talk about what are the different gaps in Singapore and also what can SPS envision to do or what we envision to do locally to support our kind of psychologists and to also better mental health in Singapore. So for some of you who may not know, the Singapore Psychological Society is the only professional body overseeing psychologists in Singapore. We have about 1,500 members in total and about 850 registered psychologists as of today. So for today's presentation, I'll share about the evolving mental health landscape in Singapore. What are the gaps that we see as a society that we want to address, and how as Singapore Psych Society, what is our role and how we're committed to promoting mental health through advocacy, partnership, and professionalism. So I'll keep my presentation short because we are kind of running behind time. But yes, thanks so much. So I think first we want to kind of look at the snapshot of the mental health state in Singapore, right? So where are we now and why we feel that we have a role as SPS to kind of fill the gaps? So as some of you may know, from 2017 to 2022, the proportion of Singaporeans with poor mental health rose from 12.5% to 17%. And as we can see from the table here, the largest increase was actually amongst our youths, aged 18 to 29 years old, which is quite concerning because our youths are our future. Right? And in terms of treatment gap, so this study was done by IMH. So in terms of treatment gap, we also found that although it's quite encouraging that people are starting to seek help earlier when they have mental health problems or difficulties, except patients with OCD, patients are also they're still taking quite a number of years to seek help when they have a mental health problem, right? So for example, if you look at in 2016, it still takes a patient with OCD to 11 years to seek help, right? If you look at somebody with depression, it still takes them a year to seek help. Right? So this treatment gap is quite concerning. And one of the reasons that at SPS, we kind of look at, just kind of consider what are some of the difficulties in helping Singaporeans seek help, right? And one of the reasons that we hypothesize is the lack of support structures and the fact that the supply of psychologists is not keeping up with the demand. So for example, if we looked at the ratio of the number of mental health professionals to our population, Singapore actually has the least number of psychiatrists and psychologists to support our population compared to other developed countries like the UK and Australia. Right? So for example, in Singapore, the ratio of psychiatrists to the population is 1 to 21,000. And the ratio of psychologists to psychologists is 1 to 10,000. So for example, I'm a psychologist. I have to technically support 10,000 people in Singapore. This is really stark, right, compared to the UK and Australia, where they have 10 times more psychologists compared to the population, right? So for example, in Australia, one psychologist is meant to support 1,000 Australians, for example, but in Singapore, one of me is meant to support 10,000. So that's really, really impossible, right? And this caused a long wait time in terms of seeking help. So the lack of mental health professionals inevitably translates to a longer wait time for someone with a mental health condition to seek help. So the Ministry of Health has recently in 2023 published the rates of waiting time to seek help in a public health setting. And they have said that it takes somebody 47 days to see a psychiatrist in a public health setting and 36 days to see a psychologist. Imagine you have depression or debilitating anxiety and you have to wait more than a month to see a psychologist. Right? And when you compare this wait time to 2018, when they last kind of published the rates, it's actually a 30 to 50% increase in wait time. So it really shows that the support structure in Singapore is not sufficient to support the mental health needs of Singaporeans. And this is where the Singapore Psychological Society feels that there are gaps that needs to be filled. I want to break down the gaps into 3 large areas. The first is awareness, second is needs, and third is in mental health care, right? So in bridging the gap, the Singapore Psychological Society believes that psychology must lead the way to close these divides with action, access, and evidence-based practices. that are inclusive, scalable, and sustainable. So just a kind of brief sharing of what the Singapore Psychological Society's vision and mission is. Our vision is the promotion of human well-being in Singapore, and our mission is to advance the research and practice of psychology in Singapore. So how are we going to use our vision and mission to bridge the gap? The first, to bridge the gap between needs and access. So to bridge the gap between awareness and action, the Singapore Society will co-lead national awareness campaigns with organizations and community partners to support mental well-being and psychological resilience. So we are committed to create focus teams on topics like mental health, youth mental health, help seeking, and resilience tied to current public health data. We also hope to partner, influencers, artists, and people with lived experiences to explore narratives about mental health. Our official publication, The Singapore Psychologist, led by our editor-in-chief, Denise, will be a platform for diverse voices. So we hope that we can dedicate features to voices that's not commonly heard, like young people, caregivers, minority groups, and individuals with lived experience, so that we can normalize real conversations about mental health by amplifying real people. Next, to bridge the gap between needs and access, we have looked into regulating psychology as a profession, right? So I'm not sure if people don't know, but you may not know, psychology as a profession is not licensed or regulated in Singapore. So literally anyone with a psychology degree or not could call themselves a psychologist, right? So as a society, we have decided to kind of move forward with regulation, and we are working with the Ministry of Health and our stakeholders to shape a fair and robust framework. Of course, we don't want to kind of bring in regulations to leave anybody behind, but at the same time, we understand the need and importance of regulation to ensure the quality of care, right? So we will continue to advocate for a system that safeguards public interest while supporting the professional growth of practitioners. Additionally, to address the supply issues of psychologists, the Singapore Psych Society is committed to supporting the training of local psychologists through supervisor trainings and academic assistance for our local psychology students, such as the provision of research grants, awards, and even scholarships to support our psychology students with their postgraduate tuition to further their studies. So this is one of the first time we're doing this. We're rolling out scholarships to support our local psychology students with their postgraduate studies to help increase the supply of psychologists in Singapore. So to bridge the gap between mental health care and evidence-based practice, we understand that we have to prepare for our psychologists for today's and tomorrow's needs. So our focus is on lifelong learning, through CPD workshops, peer learning, and partnerships with institutions like JCU. We will bring in relevant training on emerging topics and needs such as youth mental health and digital mental health interventions. But of course, we recognize that with emerging trends in mental health care, such as the use of AI, telepsychology, and digital platforms, it will inevitably raise ethical concerns. So at SPS, we have developed ethical guidelines for our psychologists, and we'll continue to look into developing ethical guidelines for digital mental health. Also, support evidence-based innovation while maintaining clinical standards. So we do believe in SPS that ethics and technology can go hand in hand, but only with thoughtful leadership that plans ahead. So we believe that we can close the gap together. The gaps in mental health are wide, but they're not insurmountable. By working with government, academic partners, private sector, and the communities, we believe we can strengthen mental health literacy, improve access to psychological services and good quality psychological services, reduce stigma, and altogether build a more resilient Singapore. And together, we hope that we can build a society where mental health is valued, psychological care is accessible, and no one falls through the cracks. Thank you.
Very much. It was really interesting to see what's happening here actually in Singapore after we hear what the immunological backgrounds of schizophrenia. So our last speaker for this session, so I know we are running a little bit over time. Last speaker comes all the way from Spain, but he's not coming actually to Singapore. He is online. And I'll just introduce you briefly to Ruben, Dr. Ruben Fernandez Rodriguez. You see his name here for the last hour and a half. He is member of the Sport and Health University Research Institute at the University of Granada in Spain. And he's also member of the Food and Mood Center. So we are back to food again at Deakin University in Australia and part of the Ground at Minds Consortium. Ruben's research is mostly related to nutrition, mental and cardiometabolic health. His interest also relates to sustainable and healthy diets that promote planetary health, with special attention to mental health and school meal interventions. So Ruben, I hope the connection works. Yeah, Ruben, I think you have to flip and unmute.
Yeah, first of all, I would like to thank Andreas, Denise, and all the CDU team for inviting me and setting up this webinar. I will try to be
He's there.
as concise and not
Sorry,
boring.
Ruben.
Yeah,
Ruben,
can you hear me?
can you just flip your slides? Yeah, can you flip to presenter mode? You're showing us your presentation mode. You had it right
Oh, yeah.
first time.
Well, thank you so much for introducing me. I'm trying to be as concise and as I can, because knowing that is the last presentation, it's going to be a challenge. So I'm going to talk about two topics. One of them is plant-based dietary patterns, and the other ones will be meat alternatives, and trying to uh, give you some recent evidence about the relationship between cardiometabolic and mental health in this topic. This will be the index that we are going to follow. Just a step into the global health crisis that we are facing. We all know that mental health is among the top 10 leading causes of the global burden of disease. There is like 970 million people suffering from depression, anxiety, cognitive impairment, or dementia right now. There is also associated this kind of disorder, mental health disorders, are associated with comorbidities such as cardiovascular disease, cancer, and cardiometabolic disorders. I am here to say that diet matters when talking about brain and mental health, because suboptimal diets accounted for 7 million deaths. We know that healthy diets could prevent this global death yearly and decrease the premature mortality. So, as far as we know, nutritional psychiatry is an integrative psychiatric model with diet as a key element. We should keep in mind that diet constitutes an ubiquitous exposure that affects the entire global population. And this is quite important because it could be used as a public health strategy to decrease the global burden of disease from mental disorders. We know that there is a association between westernized ultra-processed foods and dietary patterns with several adverse brain outcomes, and how these influence our microbial community and structure. So far, there are several healthy dietary patterns that share a common food matrix, recommending high intake of vegetable, fruits, whole grains, legumes, and pulse, also nuts. Decrease the consumption from sweets, red, processed meats, refined carbohydrates, and sweetened beverages that will be helpful for our physical but also our mental health. So let's step into recent evidence about plant-based dietary patterns. This is a recent systematic review and meta-analysis that we published. We try to explore the impact of Mediterranean diet interventions in depressive symptoms in people suffering from depression. And we saw that people following a Mediterranean diet intervention will have lower depressive symptoms. So this could be an option when trying to treat with dietary intervention these patients. Talking about another dietary patterns, plant-based diets could be also a win-win when talking about brain health, mental health, but also according to sustainable development goals, because this type of dietary patterns could have a lower environmental impact. In this systematic review and meta-analysis, we saw that quality of the food when we talk about plant-based dietary patterns also matters. So healthy choice when talking about plant-based diets shown lower likelihood of depression, anxiety, and psychological distress, dementia, and cognitive decline. In contrast, if we choose unhealthy plant-based foods, our mental health is gonna be not as good as we like. So yeah, quality matters. And this is the last paper that we have been working so far is actually in the review, so please do not share this. We try to see if healthy but also environmentally sustainable dietary patterns are related with mental, neurological, and psychiatric disorders. In this huge meta-analysis of 28 cohort studies, we saw that Mediterranean diet, healthy pro-vegetarian diet, and the Eat Lancet diet, three of them incorporated have shown that have a low environmental impact, will decrease the risks for depression, cognitive impairment, and dementia. So when bridging the gap between environmental and brain health, this could be a potential dietary strategy for us. But we also saw that other high quality dietary patterns are associated with a lower risk for mental health disorders, but especially Mediterranean diet and healthy pro-vegetarian diet. So it decreases risks for all the mental health outcome that we take into account. And what about anxiety? Well, anxiety has been low explored in cohort and studies, but we have the Food and Mood Center team have published this beautiful paper, and we saw that people eat there is not too much people eating sufficient fruits, vegetables, and legumes. The population is eating too much red meat, and this could be associated with incident anxiety and incident depression. So maybe higher intakes of vegetable, fruits, nuts, seeds would be a solution for this, a good strategy, a good recommendation to lower the risks of incident anxiety. So keep in mind also to eat fiber that has been showed the greatest reduction has a beautiful impact in our gut microbiome and our overall health. Let's step into the last topic that I will touch today, that is plant-based meat alternative. Well, we all know that there is a rise on the plant-based meat market so far. This is driven because of the population is choosing these kind of alternatives for animal health, environmental health, but also for the individual health. Um, Eating less animal-based foods, it could be also a strategy for mitigating the biodiversity loss that we are experiencing that is closely related with our lower microbial diversity in the gut. The global market is gonna be huge in the next year, so we are gonna see some strategies for these options. So far, the most explored or the most used source for these alternatives are legumes, and we have seen that legumes have a huge potential for our mental health, but also for improving our longevity. But what evidence says when we replace actual meat with plant-based meat alternative in the cardiometabolic health topic? Well, we have published this systematic review and meta-analysis of randomized control trials. There is not so much research in this area, but I think it's going to be an emerging field in the next years. And we have shown that low density cholesterol and total cholesterol will decrease when we replace meat with plant-based meat alternative. Also, there is a small reduction in body weight, but we should keep in mind that these trials only length from 1 to 8 weeks. So we need to know the impact of this replacement in the long term. Other cardiometabolic outcomes didn't show any significant change. But what about mental health? Well, this is less explored than cardiometabolic health. There is only one randomized control trial that compares beef or lamb versus plant-based meats alternative for 10 weeks. The authors saw that the overall diet quality increased over time, no matter the intervention. And multiple measures of mental health and well-being were equally in both groups. There is no difference, but they saw also a significant decrease in vitamin B12 in the plant-based meat group, while some neurotransmitter-related compounds were decreased in the meat group. So when we talk about plant-based meat alternative, there are some global concerns that are mostly related with the ultra-processed nature that have the plant-based meat alternatives. We know that ultra-processed foods will increase the risks for several mental health disorders, and there is a recent concern about the concentrations of microplastic that are found within ultra-processed foods. Another concern is about the nutrient bioavailability or micronutrients bioavailability of these alternatives. The potential gut microbiome adverse effects because of the food matrix of the processed food and the food additive, some of them emulsifier or sweeteners that are added in the process for these alternatives. Yeah, the evidence so far has shown that it could be some nutrient deficiency in this plant-based meat alternative, B12, iron, zinc, because despite plants provide precursors the conversion to bioavailable forms will be different among individuals. But are plant-based meats alternative unhealthy ultra-processed foods? Well, this recent Global Food Institute from Europe report showed that when comparing plant-based meats alternative with conventional processed meats, plant-based meat alternative only meets 3 up to 8 of the criteria. The conventional processed meats are high in salt, high in calories, low in fiber, high in saturated fat, meets almost all criteria of unhealthy ultra-processed foods. But we still don't know for sure because there is a huge room for improvement in the nutritional profile of this plant-based alternative. And this room for improvement comes with fortification of key micronutrients that they are lacking, such as iron, zinc. We know that they are including, some of them are including vitamin B12, but also it could be good to keep in mind calcium, vitamin D, and also the reduction of the nutrients of concern, such as emulsifiers, sweeteners, that is the room for improvement that I talked. Let's step into briefly in the potential mechanisms that are related with this. We can see that there are some indirect mechanisms, some of them related with the cluster of healthy lifestyle habits, because if a person choose a healthy diet, this might imply also more physical activity behaviors and other healthy lifestyle habits, like less drinking, um, not smoking, for example. But also when you are eating healthy, this could be influence better physical health feelings that will reinforce our mental health or mental well-being. And there is a lot of biological pathways that could be related with these potential mechanisms of why dietary patterns and nutrition have an impact in our brain and mental health. For example, the gut microbiome. We know that the food we eat nourishes not only our body, but also the microorganisms that are inhabiting our gut. And these affect our overall health, but specifically our brain health or mental health. So diet may uh, produce, well, might have an impact on the microbially produced metabolites, and these metabolites could be influencing and regulating our immune, endocrine, and nervous system functions. The evidence so far show that Western diets and dietary patterns with high consumption of processed foods that are high in saturated fat, sugars, and low in fiber will deplete the presence of commensal beneficial bacteria. The evidence seems to be more strong or stronger for red meat and processed meats. And also, there is a concern about the heme iron that might imply an alteration in the gut microbiome composition. And finally, producing adverse health effects in our gut microbiome and our gut barrier. So, contrary, if we choose healthy plant-based foods higher in fiber, we know that it could be producing a high alpha diversity in our gut microbiome. And for example, plant proteins have both protein and fiber, such as legumes, may have a beneficial effects for us. In contrast, animal proteins may also include choline or carnitine. Also, despite they are known to be more bioavailable, it could these components, these compounds will be metabolized by our gut bacteria and the host into metabolites with detrimental health effects. So what is or it seems to be the best for our gut microbiome should be, or it seems to be fruits, vegetables, whole grains, and legumes. With dairy, the evidence is less clear, but it seems that fermented options are the best, and we should avoid red meat and food high in sugar, fat, and salt because of their adverse health effects in our gut microbiome that will be related with poor mental health. Another interesting pathway, it could be the brain structure change and the hippocampal volume. When we talk about diet quality, healthy plant-based diets have been associated with a lower white matter hyperintensity that seems to be protective against the development of dementia. And in contrast, ultra-processed foods, soft drinks, and lower consumption of these healthy plant-based food options will be associated with a smaller left hippocampal volumes. So yeah, we have to choose high quality diets for larger hippocampal and brain tissue volumes, and finally for better brain health. So, and the implications that have these findings for clinical practice, research, and policy, well, as I have said, diet could be a preventive strategy for neurological and psychiatric disorders, with a healthy pro-vegetarian diet being a win-win for mental well-being, but also to decrease the environmental impacts and to mitigate the climate change that we are facing. So here for health professional, there is for example, a dietary screening tools that could be included into routine practice that are focused on environmental, sustainable, healthy diets. We should evaluate also dietary habits and address barriers to assess healthy, equitable, and sustainable diets in the population, and promote these kind of diets that are both health promoting and environmental friendly. We should also keep in mind the key role that have healthcare professional. Healthcare should be nutrition literacy to contribute to the planetary health. About plant-based meats alternative, also we know that legumes and pulse have been associated with longevity. Their intake has not been increased in the last years. So plant-based meats alternative that are processed foods, but this processing can eliminate or decrease the anti-nutrients that are commonly found in legumes and pulse. Plant-based meats alternative can be an option to incorporate legumes or to increase the legume consumption into our current diet. But why people are not increasing legume and pulse consumption if we know that they are so healthy for us? Well, some
Sorry, Ruben.
yeah.
Ruben, sorry, can I
Yeah.
interrupt you? I think if you could please wrap up, we still have a round table discussion.
Yeah,
coming up.
yeah, sorry.
Can address
Yeah.
a couple of things that are coming up. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you. I'm gonna finish just now. Yeah, there is so much research that should be done in this field. Intervention trials, long-term trials. Yeah, I just wanna say that well, take home message in these kind of diets will decrease depression risk, cognitive impairment, and dementia. Diet is an exposure that affects 100 of the population. So keep this in mind. Plant-based meat alternative could be a way to help for the wide transition to plant-based dietary patterns that have nice effects on our health and environmental health. Just the last phrase, our patients deserve much better, and so does our planet. Thank you so much for your time. I'm sorry if I have been too long. Yeah.
Thanks very much, Ruben, and to wrapping this actually up this whole session for today. I hope you really make this link also now talking about food again and the gut. We heard earlier on Dr. Lee talking about the immune system and the gut cells that are also involved in a lot of really mental health diseases, which are very measurable. So talking about food, right in the back, I think there is some food. I hope there is something, coffee and something to have. Otherwise, help yourself there. In the meanwhile, we will have our round table discussion. If everybody can come forward to had a presentation early on, and I have a look what questions we have on our Slido. Yes. Ruben, are you still there? Yeah, Ruben, can you just mute or unmute, but to show your face because we only see your name. If you put your video on.
Yeah.
Here we are.
I can put my video. I think that you need to allow me.
Okay, just a sec. All right. So I have one question here on Slido from not Steve. So the question I think is to you, Denise, I believe. I wonder what participants' responses to the natural versus built spaces if they were depicted at different times of day, for example, at dusk or different types of weather conditions.
Great question, not Steve. I didn't say this, but we did purposely try to get the photos all at the same time of day to at least control for that. And I think it would be an interesting question because, of course, we know that certain environments we would go to happily at midday and perhaps not on dusk. So it definitely could change at different times of day, but that would be a whole other study. So perhaps we'll do that one next. Thank you, not Steve.
There was another question. The idea of mental health literacy has been brought up a couple of times. The curriculum of MHL we can envision the context of K-12 school system. So, somebody of you can answer that?
Maybe if I can start. I just want to give an example to this question. So just very recently, an initiative started in Queensland for Thriving Kids Queensland, which involves a research group from the Queensland Brain Institute, setting up a neuroscience effort in schools. That involves bringing what the question calls mental health literacy, bringing knowledge about the brain to school, and educate children from early ages about their brains, what their brains do, how their brain develop develops, and that is down to their level of understanding, teaching them about the importance of physical exercise, the importance of healthy eating in their brain development and brain function. Similarly, the same initiative deals with how to bring and how to build modern contemporary neuroscience knowledge into the curriculum. So then teachers would cover that during class time. I think it's a very, very important question. This is just one example for this happening somewhere.
So that's another question. Pauline, I think it's directly to you. How do I enroll into the Singapore Psychological Society? Very simple question.
Very
But
simple.
somebody in the audience wants to join.
Great. So you can just go to our website. There's a list on, registration and membership. You can sign up for it. We have different tiers of membership. So we have associate membership, student membership, and also full members if you have completed your postgraduate degree in psychology. So I think everything's on the website. Yeah, you can just look on the website and apply directly on the website.
Good. Thanks so much. Clarification. Another question from the audience is, how can we enhance measures to prevent mental health illnesses in Singapore? How we can enhance measures? Singapore directly.
I think that speaks to some of your bridging the gaps, right? So what are some of the specific strategies that are being used?
Yeah, so I think a lot of it is, I think it starts from mental health literacy, right? Educating people about what mental health is. There's still quite a lot of misconception around mental health. So I think by addressing and building awareness of that, that can help enhance, people seeking help or help increase the number of people seeking help. But I think it's a very systematic approach to enhancing mental health measures, right? So besides awareness, it's also looking at the system, whether we can afford to meet the demand of people with mental health issues, and how can we increase the competency as a whole in terms of psychologists, right, providing good quality mental health care. So I think some of the things that I talked about is also building the pipeline of psychologists. So we want, as SPS, we want to be able to give back to Singapore and the Singaporeans. We want to be able to help develop more psychologists in terms of providing support for their training, but also looking at the competency and capability building of our current psychologists. So be it through peer support or bring in, training, yes, things like that, that we can really help improve, the mental health scene and measures in Singapore.
Well, I think like what Pauline said, it's quite a systemic thing, and the long waiting times for psychologists is as long as the waiting times for psychiatrists as well. So I think that's something the government and the authorities are quite aware of, and there's now a lot of thought of engaging the community primary care to get involved in this early stage of letting people have access to mental health as well, rather than just waiting for tertiary care with such the long wait times, because there's no way the resources will allow us to just have the tertiary care doctors see all the patients who need access to mental health.
I think to add on, I think it's also looking at mental health on a continuum, right? Not everybody needs to see a psychiatrist or a psychologist. There are different avenues to seek support. If you have some mental health difficulties, but not at a clinical level, then you may be able to seek help from counselors and even peer support, etc. Right? So I think it's not just building capacity and capability among psychologists, but amongst mental health professionals, and really kind of looking at mental health on a spectrum rather than, it's very disorder specific.
So after listening to Pauline's presentation about the shockingly low number of psychologists and psychiatrists in Singapore, I have to tell you, Singapore must be doing something very well. Because in Australia, with proportionally 10 times more psychologists and psychiatrists, we have an astronomically longer waiting. So we are like 6 to 10 months waiting in the public system for a psychologist, more than a year waiting. So that's the credit of Singapore.
There's some more questions, interesting questions coming up. One again around student interaction. How would the MRC, MHR's research center support honor students if the research interests and projects do align with the goals?
The support of honors students and PhD students would manifest through supporting the research group they are part of. So for many obvious reasons, the actual funding goes to the academic who's employed by JCU. But of course, it could be a project which is run by and even initiated by an honors student. The small grant, seed grant construct is particularly well suited to support an honors research project, which is within a time frame of actually 6 months, pretty much. And that's what we have in mind for that support, really help honors students to get project done. Of course, it has to be very carefully designed that it fits within the time.
So, this question came in for Professor Dillon. From your experience, how does virtual natural environments impact mental health and well-being compared to physical environments?
Oh, that's an interesting one as well. We have done some research in virtual environments. There has been some indication that even digital environments, so what you've got on your smartphone, can be beneficial. One of my colleagues, Jose Yong, has done some research on this with some collaborators, and they looked at people's content on their smartphones. So do you have photos of nature, or do you have photos of friends or pets? Pets also nature. But there was a benefits in terms of people felt better, moods were improved for those who had the digital photos. Also, with research in virtual environments, one of my honours students did want to study if there were benefits from taking a virtual environment for little short nature naps, I guess, or short holidays at your desk in a busy office environment. So, you know, like you can have people coming around doing the quick massage on your back. So this was having the video goggles, and you could take it around and you could have a quick nature break and then get back to work. And we wanted to see, does attention restoration benefits translate to virtual environments? Turned out it did. So it can be positively beneficial. My own recommendation, though, is get out into nature whenever you can, because virtual environments really aren't going to take the place of those real environments in terms of connecting to real nature.
I have a more technical question to Dr. Lee, and talked about earlier on that overall we see a reduction in infectious diseases, which is a good thing. But you saw that when you talked about the Th1 and Th2 immune system, they are basically two major arms. And the Th1 system is actually involved when we have infectious diseases. So reduction of infectious diseases is kind of aligned with maybe a more Th2-driven immune response. Are this possibly a driver that we have less infectious diseases and more mental disorders, because we have a more Th2-driven? That's seen globally, not just in Singapore.
Yeah, I mean, the idea of infections predisposing to schizophrenia is not new, actually. A lot of epidemiological studies have associated increased risk of psychosis with, like I mentioned, maternal or fetal infections early on. But there isn't very strong evidence to suggest that it's due to an infectious cause till date, although people have been looking for that.
More towards Th2. So Th2 response is non-infectious. We have less Th1 driven, so maybe that drives the immune system to responding to something. It's like food allergies. So I work on allergies. This Th2 response we see now 10 times more than 20 years ago. So that's on the global trend. Autoimmune disease in general are how many times more than 20 years ago? Then comes in again what Ruben says is the diet. This correlation between nanoplastic, whatever it's in the diet, our immune system, the gut-brain barrier is clearly published. There's no kind of distinguishing that that's kind of fake science. There's absolutely the data there. But it's very complex, and you measure one thing with your cells and cytometry. But I think there is possibility of really modulating this in a kind of non-pharmaceutical way, perhaps. That's opening the...
There might be some association there. I mean, these are observational studies that they did.
Exactly.
Very interesting.
So that's a question coming back to children. If I raise children in the tropics, which is half the world population, what sort of specific activities we can do for our kids to avoid mental health issues later in their life? I think that's really a hands-on question. Parents definitely have.
After hearing Ruben's presentation, I would say make sure they get a healthy diet, but and probably plant-based, but as long as it's healthy plant-based. But one of the other things is to get them out into nature, get them used to those mini micro nature exposures. Let them lie on their back on the grass and look up at the clouds and just observe nature. Let them stop and do nothing for a while, sitting on the grass. I think in Singapore particularly, I've observed that most of children's time is very structured. All of their playtime is even structured. They go on in weekends and study at the shopping malls, at the learning enrichment centres, and then they go on to structured play. It could be ballet, it could be other things, but a lot of it is indoors. And even if it's outdoors, it's still structured play. So I would just recommend let them have some time to understand that there are things they can do, and just be in nature without doing things is fine.
There's one question for Ruben. Do you hear me online? Yes, Ruben, you can hear? So
Yeah.
Question there. How will people know whether their plant-based diet is a healthy or unhealthy one? Will marketing and advertising work against this objective? Because we hear a lot about alternative plant-based proteins and hamburgers. What makes it different from just eating a broccoli or cauliflower without processing it? How do we know what's better?
Yeah. Well, I think that the easy message here is for now, if you are eating a healthy plant-based food, just choose the whole plant-based food option that we have so far with strong evidence, like fruits, vegetables, legumes, pulse, nuts. But also, I think that it might be room for plant-based meats alternative, not for all, but maybe some plant-based meats alternative that could fit into a healthy plant-based dietary pattern. It could be depending on the nutritional profile, but also in the degree of the process of the food. I mean, if they are choosing emulsifier, sweeteners, they are including not so healthy fat source, maybe that's not a good option. But still, if they are replacing processed meat, it could be helpful for us, but not to replace our whole plant-based foods. That's not the objective of plant-based meat alternative. Plant-based meat alternative could fit into a healthy plant-based dietary patterns, but we need to keep in mind that they are mainly used to replace meat options and red meat options that have some negative effects in our health.
Okay, thanks, Ruben. I think that's really clearly makes sense. It's supplementing it, not replacing it. So there's a question also about psychologists. Why are not all psychologists required to be registered here in Singapore?
That's for me. I think to put in context, Singapore is a very young country. We are celebrating our 60th birthday this year. And the psychology profession in Singapore is even younger. So the Singapore Psychological Society, for example, was started in 1979. So I think there's a lot of historical context as to why it hasn't been registered or regulated, because the profession is very, very young, right? Compared to other countries where, you have few hundred years of history in terms of building the profession. So I think we understand the importance of regulating, but we also understand that we cannot do it overnight because there's a lot of implications towards regulating. For example, people may not meet the criteria anymore and they may lose jobs, right? And these people may be practicing for many, many years. So I think we need to kind of look at regulation in a very stepped care approach, and also work with the government agencies when we regulate it to kind of come up with a more robust framework. I think we have talked about regulation as a society for more than 10 years. And this is the closest we've come towards regulation. And we do believe that we would achieve that in the next couple of years. Yeah, I hope that answers the question.
No, thank you. So it's a work in progress. In a similar line, I think more on the disease question, there is a question around, are there any changes in patterns in the mental health scene in Singapore that is particularly alarming? We never heard about it. Popping up different from other countries.
I think one thing that I've shared is that there are more people having mental health difficulties or experiencing mental health difficulties. And one thing that's quite alarming for us is that our youth are actually, the ones that's experiencing a higher kind of mental health disorders rate, right? And I think in very recent studies by the SOS, there's also an increasing number of suicide rates among youth, which is very alarming. Although I think for this year, the first time where it didn't increase so much. But I think youth mental health is one of the, emerging kind of topic for us amongst clinicians that we are quite concerned about.
Just a plug for Singapore Psychologist. If you want to go to our website and read our latest issue, it's on youth mental health.
Thanks. No, that's a good point. I think we have one last question. It's in general, again, postgrad scholarships. So if somebody is interested, SPS scholarship and requirements, please, for masters and doctoral students. I guess it's part of the university training.
Yes, so I think we're quite excited to share about this new initiative. However, we are not ready to kind of share the kind of the ins and outs of it, but do kind of keep a lookout on our website and sign up as a member if you kind of want to receive emails or kind of information about that. At this moment, we do not have the kind of the information on that, but that's definitely something that we are looking into kind of providing in this current council term.
Yeah, thanks. I think we have one last question. So that's maybe to Zoltan about mental health stigma at the workplace. How can this be addressed that it's actually not? I think universities, they're quite proactive now, or to JCU.
Yeah, I'm sure you're right. So universities that are probably a bit more heightened, supposed to be more aligned. Some of the other workplaces, it's probably a better addressed issue, but I can easily see industries where it's not being focused on. One of those are actually areas such as the military and first responders, professions that are usually associated with the requirement of being and not to sort of accept that you have issues. If you look at certain professions like paramedics who go out day in, day out to see major accidents and people dying in front of them, terrible scenes. So that's proper reason for PTSD, and they are not really looked after. Police and military. Police, again, almost by definition, people who are witnessing and being part of really terrible situations. And if you are a policeman, especially, you are not inclined to accept that you have problems, you can't sleep, you are really down, you lost your motivation. So I think there are clearly many areas in the workplace when these issues are sort of culturally not addressed properly. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks. Is there any question here from the floor directly without using? And otherwise, I would like to thank the panel, and I hope you had really some experience and learned something. Also, our online listeners. I made sure we actually record the whole session. For somebody who was in Australia, it's 2 hours ahead, so it's quite late. So people ask me if it's recorded. So we will somewhere put it up there on the web that people can actually listen to it. Showing our DVC, who was not able to attend today. Thanks very much, and have a healthy evening. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.